Good morning, good morning. Hope you all have your coffee. Hope you had a lovely breakfast. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. My name is Tonya Pritchett. I'm from Newfoundland and Labrador. Hey, whoo, that sounds good. That's the way to start a morning. Merci beaucoup. C'est mon plaisir d'être ici aujourd'hui avec mon panel fantastique. C'était vraiment un honneur. On est très excités à propos de cette conférence ici. We are so excited about this conference. I'm on the organizing committee, and it's been a pleasure, an absolute pleasure, to work with my colleagues in this committee and in this venue. We are looking forward to this being a conference with some change. So there's a lot of recording happening, a lot of recommendations, and on that note, I open this room sincerely, truly, and welcome curiosity, questions, dialogue, pushback, whatever we can do here to allow the space to be of an important changing space. So I'm asking this room this morning to engage. I have three fabulous panelists with me: Mavis Morton, Jen, I'm going to say her name wrong at the end, but it's a beautiful name, Dagsvik, and Mavis Morton is on my right, and Leakey is on my left. Jen is at the end here. The three panelists are going to speak. Please just, what we've decided to do, because we want to give a good space for exchange at the end, is just go through the presentations and then see what we can, because some of the recommendations are obviously knitting and overlapping. So again, if you do have a question at the end of the presentation, you could do that, but what we're going to try to do is just move them along because they all have slides, which is lovely in the morning, because you get to sit back and you've got visual entertainment. So I'm happy to be here. Je suis très contente de commencer cette panel. The name of it is, and I'm sure you've looked, is Co-Designing Justice: Participation as a Design Method. And I'm getting older. These glasses are interesting things. Okay, and so we're just going to start, as I said, with Jen. I just want to say that instead of reading out the biographies, I really encourage you to read these biographies, because they're quite interesting and also quite impressive. A lot of research going on up here. I'm honored, as I said, to be with these people. On va commencer tout de suite, puis on va commencer avec Jennifer. Puis elle va parler, she works, as you know, in the Faculty of Law at Lakehead University. You'll read the rest, but what's really fascinating is her work in the newcomer clinic with refugees and immigrants. Thank you. Jen.
Thanks so much, Tonya. And hi, everyone. It's so nice to be here. It's been a great day and a half so far of listening to everybody's presentations and learning so much together, and it's really wonderful to be here, so thank you. I want to talk a little bit about the clinic where I work in Thunder Bay, but I'll focus mostly on this idea of using an infrastructural lens to talk about access to justice. I confess that I am not someone who found a lot of utility in the big data approach to justice information when we were setting up our clinic and identifying the legal needs that our clients had. When I went to legal needs assessments, there was no indication that people with immigration or refugee law issues in Northern Ontario would have any kind of legal need that needed to be served. That wasn't something that was ever caught by a legal needs assessment that I was aware of, but experience on the ground from the settlement organization that I work with, and from myself, I was a private practice immigration lawyer at the time that we started the clinic around 2019, 2020 was when we first sort of got the idea for it. Our experience was that there were lots of people who were being recruited to the city for economic development reasons, that the city was sort of launching these economic development immigration programs, trying to bring people to Northwestern Ontario, which is a huge region. I'll show you a picture later. And when we bring people for immigration purposes, especially people with temporary statuses, they have legal needs. That shouldn't be a surprise, but it's not something that was caught by legal needs assessments, and it wasn't something that was planned for by the people who were recruiting immigrants and refugees to our city. And so when we started our clinic, we were sort of looking for research to justify applying for funding for this clinic. or research to justify asking our local legal aid clinic, legal aid funded clinic, to take up this call for service for migrants and refugees. And it was tricky to find that. So we just started doing the work. We are 5 years in. Our clinic coordinator, Bianca Espinoza, is here today. And I was looking at our statistics that we gathered last year. So we had 525 or so requests for intake last year in Thunder Bay, and we served almost 200 clients with some form of support, whether it was just a consultation, which is usually 1 or 2 hours of meeting time and then a few more hours of work, whether it was ongoing support with an immigration application, that's much longer, much more involved, or representation in front of court, tribunals, or directly with the Minister of Immigration on immigration applications. A fun thing about immigration in Thunder Bay is that we do all kinds of immigrations. We have refugees, we have resettled refugees, we have people trying to reunite with their family, we have economic migrants, we have temporary foreign workers, we have people who are doing spousal sponsorships. And while it would be lovely for all of those processes to go smoothly and for legal need not to be something that comes to the fore, that is generally not the case, especially in the current environment where the government is trying to reduce the number of immigrants and therefore trying to exclude people from the country. So this approach, as we were trying to sort of explain this legal need and how it developed, how it came up, this approach of infrastructures seemed to be a promising one. So I'll get into talking about that. I turned off my mic instead of pressing my slide. We'll get there, we'll get there. Okay, so this is a picture. Has anybody been to Northwestern Ontario? Okay, this is the Nipigon River Bridge. I thought it was a great picture for talking about infrastructure because there's a giant gap in it at this point in its construction. But it's getting there, right? It's replacing this old thing that didn't quite work anymore. It's in the process of being built. It takes a massive amount of work. And it's going to bring people together. It's going to bring people from one place to another place. It's going to facilitate flow. Not long after it was built, it broke. And it had to be fixed again. And that's the life of infrastructure, right? It is never quite static. It's a place where people come. There's lots of academic literature on infrastructure studies. It started, I believe, in the anthropology world. And it has a really prominent role now in science and tech studies. It is coming to law. Different disciplines describe their different disciplines as having an infrastructural turn. And in a 2025 article, a scholar in the US, Yuvraj Joshi and Deborah Archer, called for an infrastructural turn in law, and in particular a focus on infrastructure equality. So they say, I have some quotes around what infrastructure means, things and the relation between things. That's the very poetic sort of scholar, Philip Larkin, who writes about that. And then terrain of power and contestation. So it's very much not neutral. When we build infrastructure, it's not neutral. We're building it for particular purposes, often economic purposes, social purposes. And Yoshi and Archer say, advancing infrastructure equality demands a fundamental reconsideration of how we understand collective societal responsibilities. Our individual approach to infrastructure has contributed to deep-rooted patterns of inequality. Where public solutions could serve and benefit everyone, we see a fragmented system marked by privatized services, exclusionary boundaries, and market-driven development that consistently disadvantages marginalized communities. And I think we can all hear echoes of access to justice problems in that sort of idea of the call for infrastructure equality. Another thing about infrastructure is we know it has this relationship between the private world and the state, between individuals, the private world, and the state. And I think sometimes in access to justice literature, we might lose what the state is doing that's contributing to these access to justice crises that we see. And we see that especially in immigration, that it's necessary to take account of the power structures that are operating through law and through the state that are causing people problems on the ground that we then respond to. So it's a useful frame for that. This is an old Thunder Bay infrastructure picture that I thought was lovely. When you take an infrastructure lens and try to make it more concrete in a way that might apply to an access to justice problem, there's a lot of things you could look at, right? You could look at the particular place that these issues are coming up in, your particular access to justice issue. For Thunder Bay, that's really important. You could look at all kinds of other things that I'm going to talk about, and I'm going to kind of zoom through, so I won't spend a lot of time on this particular slide. So let's start with place. Here's our person, because we're being person-centered. Here's our person in Thunder Bay trying to solve an immigration problem. There's a lot of different things that we could talk about in terms of place that I'll mention, but one is, let's look at distance. Distance matters when you're talking about Thunder Bay. There are still, most immigration programs now take place over interfaces, so you can Zoom with tribunals. All your applications are going to be done through portals that are online. Those give rise to their own problems, but we'll get to that. But some things you still need to go in person for. If you want to start a refugee claim from Thunder Bay, you still need to travel to Winnipeg to meet with an officer in person, and there are very few exceptions to that. One of the things we do at our clinic that is probably not a well-known access to justice need is that we will try to advocate with IRCC directly because we have their email addresses, and we'll try to connect with them and say, hey, this person shouldn't be traveling to Winnipeg. They can't afford it. They have kids. Whatever it is. They can't get the time off work. Sometimes we're successful, sometimes we're not. But place matters for that. Place matters for what kinds of services are available. So we actually have a lot of services in Thunder Bay. We are a hub for Northwestern Ontario, but we can sometimes be described as rural. For our rural immigration program, we are rural. We don't have a high population density. We're a hub for that huge area the size of France, the northwestern part of the province, that has a lot of immigrants and refugees sort of settled in different places, very remote sometimes all around it. But we're see where all the little flags are? All the little flags are here, right? In the Central Canada corridor. This is the center of power. We are part of this province, very much dependent on that center of power. A lot of economic value is extracted from our part of the province. But we don't have a lot of say in those power structures. So it can be a frustrating experience being in Thunder Bay. And it can be a frustrating experience trying to access even legal clinic help because all the legal clinics that do immigration work until our clinic opened were in Toronto and Ottawa. We have a really interesting sort of social structures, set of social problems in Thunder Bay. If you've watched the news, if you've heard the podcast about our city, we have huge problems. We have 3 Indigenous people went missing in the city over the last month. We have the province trying to develop the Ring of Fire and bringing migrant labor in for that purpose. We have the federal government trying to dump nuclear waste about 3 hours north of Thunder Bay. With significant opposition to that from First Nations and other community groups. At the same time, we're trying to welcome more people to reverse demographic decline that's happening in the city. So conversations around immigration and then helping immigrants can become quite political. We have physical structures to deal with immigration that are mostly carceral. So we have Canada Border Services, our jail, sometimes sometimes people dealing with immigration issues end up at the jail. And we have our border, that's a fox crossing the border during the pandemic because nobody else could. We have a beautiful courthouse that is mostly empty because of Zoom. We have a wonderful legal clinic, community legal clinic called Kenawea, that's a picture of it, that is not able to serve immigration legal needs because they have so many other demands on their time. We were able to open a physical space. We had been at the top of the law school, which was a very inaccessible space, for a number of years, and now we're storefront. But we had such a hard time just finding a physical space to provide our services from, and still we don't have an accessible bathroom. And like all of these sort of little issues are part of what makes justice accessible or not. There is an infrastructural quality to law. So one of the focuses of this infrastructures research is the infrastructural quality that law has. Citizenship and immigration law is itself very complex. On the left side of the screen there, or maybe the right if you're looking at it that way, it's just a snapshot of some of the temporary policies that are in place with immigration now. We don't legislate immigration anymore. The minister makes policies that come in a flash, expire. We're constantly just trying to keep up on what the rules are that apply to particular people's situations, which increases the complexity significantly. Sometimes the policies are great because they're able to respond quickly to an emerging issue, but they really add to the complexity of the work that people are doing in this area, making the legal need greater. More complexity, the less people are willing to do it themselves or to sort of be the trusted helper, because we're not sure what we're doing at any given time. We also have people running into other legal regimes when they're dealing with immigration and refugee law. This is an example of the different processes that people might go through on one particular immigration pathway. If you look at this sort of map, you can imagine that there are multiple different decision makers, multiple different applications, multiple different portals, and just a ton of administrative burden trying to help somebody avoid, or trying to avoid, if you're that individual, trying to go through this process yourself, trying to avoid deportation. In Thunder Bay, the laws and technicalities that are particularly relevant are these new rural and northern programs that are immigration programs trying to encourage people to move to the city. And so when we look at access to justice needs, it's quite obvious that people might have legal need when they don't, when they move themselves and their families all the way to Thunder Bay or a place like it, and then don't end up qualifying for the program that they were hoping to apply for. That's a lot of the need that we see in our community. It's not always the need we serve at our clinic. There's lots of other people who we try to get to help with those issues. But we frequently see, for example, people being exploited by employers who are using permanent residence as a basis on which to, the promise of permanent residence under these employer-driven permanent residence program, they're using them as a way to sort of gain economically from their workers. So maybe they'll say, okay, we'll pay you $26 an hour on paper, but we're actually paying you minimum wage in real life, and you will put up with that worker because you want to get permanent residence from these programs. This is common in immigration. Whenever we tie immigration status to employers, we know that exploitation results. And now it's happening in a place that is less resourced to manage it. So the idea that there would be legal need coming out of this is not surprising at all. And then we have our law societies and our consultant regulation organizations and the minister telling people who can help. Who can help with immigration programs is also a huge part of law that structures how people deal with their access to justice problems, and it causes a lot of problems in itself. It used to be, so interfaces are another thing you could look at when you're looking at infrastructures. And we're talking about digital ones for the most part. Often an answer to immigration problems in rural and remote places is, oh, you can do it digitally. You can get onto an online portal. You can do this remotely. You can use some kind of app. Let's look at connecting you with a lawyer in a bigger city. And our experience at the clinic, and from research that I've done interviewing people who are not clients of the clinic, is people really do want somebody local. They want somebody to walk with them. There's a huge tradition in immigration of support, walking with, being that sort of person who welcomes an immigrant or a refugee to the community and being with them, and people like doing that, and people want to have that, is what we've learned. I have this little news clipping from the Terrace Bay News, which is a community near Thunder Bay, that says the immigration officer from Fort William will conduct interviews in Scriber at the Circle Route Motel. Well, that would never happen now. We don't see immigration officers anymore. Immigration officers don't come to town. You won't even know the name of the immigration officer who made the decision on your file. You won't know who gave you permanent residence. Down in the bottom corner, you can't really see it, but that's the email you get now when you become a permanent resident. You get an email from a portal that says, welcome to Canada. you're a permanent resident now. When people get citizenship, I print their certificates on our printer. Like there's no, the ceremonies are online. So much has been dispersed, but people need the certificate. They need somebody to print it on the printer, right? And you don't think of it as a legal need that a lawyer needs to attend to, but it ends up being what we do. So we have these portals as well that are interesting, but we joke that they give rise to the legal need themselves. We often sometimes say that if you could download the forms that immigration needs people to fill out, we wouldn't need a legal clinic. It's not entirely true, but it's a big part of the need. So I'll just close with suggesting there's this other infrastructural concept. There's a few others that I won't have time to talk more about, but the one that I'd like to sort of close with is, if we look at the way that people in their local communities or people in their daily work of going through justice systems try to patchwork over the places where the state has become absent and where the state has failed to deliver services to people, we can see a lot of promise. I think of our clinic as a bit of a patchwork solution. We don't fit into it. We're not funded by legal aid. We're funded by the Law Foundation. But I think of us as a bit of a patchwork. I think of a lot of the work that the workers in our community are doing as a patchwork. They are seeing a problem. They're seeing a gap. They're seeing glitches caused by these interfaces that are either intentional or not on the part of the government, and they're trying to cover them over, and they're doing that work. It's hard work. They're often doing it off the side of their desk. They're often doing it unpaid or very low paid. And so one way of looking at access to justice problems is to look at the people who are doing the patchworking and to say, how can we make this more sustainable? Do we want to make it more sustainable? Do people in the community want it to be more sustainable? And then how do we do that? How do we make it more sustainable? It may not fit into the existing infrastructures that have been with us for a really long time, but maybe that's okay. So I found the infrastructural lens useful. I hope it's something that you also find useful, and thanks very much for hearing about it.
Thanks so much, Jen. And I'm just going to ask everybody to reflect and hold their comments for now, just because we started a little bit late. So I'm going to move right on. And Jen, that was fascinating. And what I want the audience to think about is just sort of, these are three panelists in different areas, and Aaron and Mavis are going to be focusing more on intimate partner violence. But it's interesting because what's coming out of all three are recommendations that talk about the same kind of thing. So I've asked these, and thanks, Jen, for ending with that about the infrastructure and the patchworking. So I just want you to think a little bit about that, and perhaps we'll have a discussion after that will kind of stimulate some more on sort of mobilizing the knowledge now and how we can move these recommendations forward. So next is Mavis Morton, and she's a professor at the University of Guelph. Again, I encourage you to read the bios. I can tell you a little bit personal stuff about these guys, and Mavis is an avid pickleball fan, so if you like pickleball. And anyway, at this time, I'll just turn it over to Mavis, and thanks so much, and thanks for holding, but we really want to get the discussion going at the end. Thanks.
Good morning. I'm Mavis Morton, as Tonya said. I want to thank Tonya. I've never had a moderator that is so, we have met like 3 or 4 times, all of us. Like, it's incredible. Anyway, thank you so much, and really nice to meet my panelists and many of you. So I'm a sociologist and a community engaged scholar. I've been at the University of Guelph since 2009. I've also spent a decade after my PhD working with community-based organizations, doing research and related activities. What I'm going to talk about today is research that comes from a 3-year collaborative research project between myself, some U of G students, and Luke's Place. That if any of you know, they're a not-for-profit organization based in Durham region that provides support to survivors of intimate partner violence in order to help them navigate the Ontario family law system. So this project, I worked with the legal director, counseling manager, and their research coordinator. So this was a sorry, I keep going back there. This was a multi-year, what we're referring to critical community engaged research designed to hear from diverse and underrepresented intimate partner violence victim survivors about their experiences with the Ontario family law system, and as we know, who are also navigating multiple legal systems and institutions. The design of the research was collaborative and participatory. What I mean by community engaged scholarship is that it is a partnership between, in our case, universities and communities, community partners, guided by lots of principles, including mutual benefit, reciprocity, trust, relationships, and one of the big guiding principles is community identified priorities. And so we work together to collaboratively co-create and attempt to mobilize knowledge to address social problems, social issues, in this case, intimate partner violence experiences of Ontario family law system. And then the critical component, which was something that Gordon DeCruz does a beautiful job of talking about that lens. It's really to add that focus on justice and looking at the root causes of inequality, which means focusing on the societal conditions that those particularly from currently and historically marginalized backgrounds, so that they can participate in and influence decisions that impact their lives. We used mixed methods. I'll talk a bit more about that. So the research that we did, we collected 3 different kinds of data. I did interviews with service providers who were served diverse populations and offered support and resources to diverse populations, including intimate partner victim survivors. We created a Qualtrics survey and received 389 responses from intimate partner survivors, and I did 36 in-depth interviews. And by the way, I just wanted to point out, I use the term now victim survivor. It was in one of the interviews that I did. I tended to use the word survivors to that point, but one of the women that I talked to said, although I have survived intimate partner violence to date, I continue to be a victim in the Ontario family law system. So I thought that was a really important way to now sort of talk about, particularly with this research. So we've heard from many others at this conference, our research findings, like many of you, highlight access to justice issues. The next 5 slides, I'm going to go pretty quickly, but they identify what we've sort of put together as the 5 most common themes that came from all of the data. So the first theme is really the biggest one, which refers to challenges and barriers related to accessing justice. Big surprise. Finding and affording a family law lawyer that, period, and one that is knowledgeable about gender-based violence and offers trauma-informed practices. Accessing legal aid. Access to plain language information and culturally relevant and trauma-informed information. So again, there's tons of detail here, but you get the point. The next major theme is the just overwhelmingly complicated, confusing, and uncertain landscape. Victim survivors don't know where to start and don't know what to believe. They don't understand what they're hearing, they're reading, they're told, and there is a lot of inconsistent information. There is a huge amount of uncertainty, and what I heard over and over again was risk, how risky engaging in this system is. One participant, I think, summed it up when she told me, it is a risk that is not worth taking. Many women I talked to said had they known what they were getting into, they would never have bothered. overwhelmingly a lack of communication and coordination between the Ontario family law system and other legal systems. Third bucket or theme are more sort of systemic failures, structural problems. So as we've heard, the very structure and design of the system was identified as problematic. The lack of consistency, again, I know you've heard a lot of this already. Many women talked about being in front of different judges every time they went to court, and many not having a sense of, what happened before. Litigation and economic abuse. I heard that in the afternoon session Karen talked about yesterday. So this included delays, intimidation, and overwhelmingly survivors talked about how financially draining this was. Lack of abuser accountability and the ability that the system allowed perpetrators to get away with things, including delaying the process, and victim survivors feeling re-victimized by engaging in these processes instead of feeling protected. Another big theme was just, generally experiences of gender, race, class, stereotypes, bias, discrimination. They often felt not believed and were not given a chance to speak. Their experiences of violence were minimized, ignored, dismissed, or mislabeled high conflict. And what I noticed that I found more in hearing from victim survivors than I'd seen in the literature previously, although it has come up in this conference, is the gatekeeping happened at the level of the lawyer. It often never got to the judge. Even though there's a lot of research that talks about judges don't want to hear this, it rarely got to the judge. And victim survivors felt discredited. There were lots of false claims and allegations made against them, including parental alienation, mental health allegations, and then cultural threats like deportation made to coerce survivors to agree to demands that were not in their best interest. And then all of those above issues in the buckets that I've identified lead to unsafe and unresolved outcomes and negative impacts. They felt pressure to settle and to negotiate. One judge told a couple to leave the court, go talk to a mediator, and come back. And when they went to the mediator suggested they flip a coin to resolve their many unresolved issues. There was a lack of enforcement of court orders, ineffective and unsafe outcomes like providing unsupervised access of children with an abusive partner, great financial hardship because of prolonged legal battles. Many women lost all of their savings and have gone into great debt. And then again, generally negative physical and psychological impacts on their children and their children's well-being. So, the survivors that we heard from had many, many recommendations. I'm going to really hone in on a few, but the ones I'm talking about all align with principles of participatory design, where participation itself becomes a tool of justice, and the knowledge to action implementation. I actually think this is a really big thing. I've gotten much more interested in trying to learn more about the knowledge to action gap. So I think it's really something we need to figure out, how to get the right information to the right people at the right time. I was supposed to put that on a little earlier. Okay, so 3 main recommendations. Co-design and co-deliver specialized education and training for all legal professionals. So this one specific example is in-depth and comprehensive knowledge about gender-based violence. Provide accessible, intersectional, culturally responsive, and trauma-informed legal information. For example, how to find lawyers who are knowledgeable about gender-based violence, who are culturally aware, and who are trauma-informed. And then work on those system-level reforms, including family law legislation and processes to help address the problem with the lack of coordination and communication between systems. And then, so this is my overall recommendation. Thank you very much. Happy to talk about or answer questions of other things or talk about things that you would like us to know. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mavis. That was fascinating, and I really encourage again to think about those recommendations so that we can really have a fruitful discussion in the room. Erin is going to speak next. You know, these are three different, very different subjects in some ways, but what I'm wanting you to think about is the overall. We're trying to make change. We don't want it to be a conference where we don't come out of this without using all this fabulous data that Mavis just talked about, for example. So I really look forward to the discussion. I'll move on, but just to kind of note that these knit together in an interesting way, because sometimes, you know, the rural, the intimate partner violence, they all need that infrastructure recreation, and sort of the patchwork issue that Jen talked about is really interesting. Aaron is at the University of Victoria. He's a professor there, and he's also, well, you can read his bio. So thank you, Aaron, and we're going to look forward to it. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here. I'm really excited to be here with my colleagues as well. I do see a lot of overlap in our participatory methods, you know, infrastructuring and participatory design, thinking about co-design with survivors of violence. Really, in this presentation, I'm going to examine some of the barriers to participatory legal design with individuals that have been impacted by violence. In particular, I'm thinking about intimate partner violence. So I did a scan of legal design literature. I noted rarely, if ever, are persons affected by violence directly included in participatory legal design. It's a little bit less true in sort of less discrete design activities, so where people are doing individual projects, nonprofit organizations, those kind of things. They do have some projects where survivors of violence are actively included in design activity, but rarely in formally documented scholarly activity. There's no examples of direct participation. Legal design, just for those of you that the discipline is new to you, refers to the applications of methods and mindsets that are consistent with design. Often we think of design more in architecture and engineering, but now to matters of law and justice. It's a very new discipline and approach. It's considered a culture of, you know, experimentation and prototyping, but also a practice. And it's also a way to think about how our legal institutions might change, might intentionally design them. Participatory design, we've talked about a lot through this conference, refers to a continuum of ways that an individual might participate. What we're really talking about here is co-design. So that's more active engagement with an individual around how they might design, and it may be very intentionally as co-designers or co-facilitators at all stages of the process. We might draw some thinking from participatory action research to think about how intentionally how power flows in the design space. So I might have to reflect on my role as a designer, on all these different titles and credentials, and how that might impact power relationships, and do so quite intentionally. And as Mavis said, I might then think about participation as a justice activity in itself. So this is, if you look at the way that survivors of violence perceive justice, so if I were to say, what is justice to you? There's a list of different personal and societal indicators, many of them agency, recognition, having a voice, having a say. These kind of things can be built into design, right? So it can then meet some of those perceived justice indicators. So that's what I envision with participatory design. The lack of co-design activities. So why does this matter? Kim Stanton's report, a lot of us have been reflecting on this, came out last year, called the British Columbia Legal System's Treatment of Intimate Partner Violence Survivors. In this report, Kim detailed the state of the nation. He said, we've stagnated. We have 33 years of unimplemented recommendations. Over the course of the conference, I hear a lot of frustration. You know, we talk a lot, we don't do things. So Kim is then now reflecting on the barriers to change. And in part, Kim reflects on the barriers as a design problem and says we need an intersectional analysis in designing legal systems and institutions. This coincides with some work from Margaret Hagan, but I'm going to skip over that. Here's a quote from Kim Stanton. The legal system is designed by people with considerable privilege in our society, and it therefore contains barriers to marginalized people that are hard to see from the place of privilege and hard to get past from the margins. And what I see in this quote is two things. It's a critique of top-down design. It's a critique as well of human-centered design. So top-down design is when we're designing for people, on their behalf. Human-centered design, we're collecting their views from a place of, with the intention of centering their views through a process we call empathy throughout the design process. It's saying, Kim is essentially saying we have too many biases. We're overlooking things. If our systems are stagnated, we're not getting the immediacy that people feel on the ground in their real lives. So the hint in Kim's approach is we need to actively involve them in design as co-designers. Then we need to attend to power in the space. And this coincides with what we see in design theory. So design, in legal design, in design general, we don't just design material things like a table or a chair, or we're in a legal institution here, a building. It's a material object, but there's a social dimension to that object. And that means that it embeds a worldview. In design, the worldview is about what ought to be. We look at the current conditions. We're trying to design preferred conditions, right? So when we're thinking about legal design, we're thinking about what law ought to be. Legal design scholars would say that ought to reflect some democratic engagement. So then we think, oh, legal design is a way to engage people democratically. And we have to ensure that the worldviews that are embedded in design reflect the plurality of experiences that are out there, especially the experiences of individuals or end users who have lived experience of a legal or justice problem. We need to ensure their worldviews are embedded in design. This coincides with an empowerment approach. It's not really justice totally if someone isn't involved in some way in their own matter of justice, if they're not having leadership in it in one way or another. Justice should break dependencies from our legal institutions, including from us, right? We work ourselves out of a job, we've heard that, not create more dependencies. And an empowerment approach is also, as I mentioned this, it's going to attend to power in design. It's going to raise concern about how justice remedies may be a reoccurrence of power relationships if we're not careful. So there's strong power dynamics in helper-helped, right? We need to think at equalizing that in the process of justice. So then justice isn't just an end, it's actually something we do every step along the way. It's a process as well. Some of the barriers that I found to active participation, I've traced, and I don't think it's only to this book, but it might in part come from some of the early thinking of Lenora Walker's in a book called The Battered Women Syndrome. So what Lenora Walker was trying to do was understand why intimate partner survivors don't leave. And she came up with the concept of learned helplessness, which she defined as a loss of contingency between response and outcome. Later, feminist scholars and Evan Stark, who is a preeminent intimate partner violence scholar, noted that this concept of learned helplessness associated with the person impacted by intimate partner violence has become pervasive in our legal consciousness, in our legal institutions, and in our approaches to create a caricature of a helpless, because intimate partner violence is gender-based, woman in intimate partner violence. Feminists have noted that this characterization isn't complete. It's not substantiated by data. Post-structural feminism has noted that even in these situations of high constraint, people do leave, and there's agency that we need to be acknowledging. Yet this thought system seems to be quite pervasive. It's pervasive. Now I'm going to link in participatory research. I'm going to link this thought system then to participatory legal design. So this thought system, it implicates views on survivor capacity. So loss of contingency between response and outcome, this idea of learned helplessness, becomes impaired decision-making. which means that there are assumptions about, due to the psychological impacts of intimate partner violence, and it's sometimes injury, physical injuries, brain injury included, from as an outcome of the violence, we may assume that decision-making is impaired post-harm. So there becomes a reluctance to put decisions about one's own well-being in the hands of survivors themselves. In the research community, there's this idea of re-victimization. And it's a view that, due to the sensitive nature of the topic, that participatory events might actually bring about emotional distress, either through recounting one's own experience or either to exposure to the topic. And there's a concept that is also quite pervasive called categorical vulnerability. And it's the idea that as a whole people group, this population, intimate partner violence survivors, may be designated as vulnerable, which implicates a vulnerability to exploitation through participatory activity. So they might, there's risk or view that there might be risk of consenting to things that are in their own interest. All of that amounts to a very protectionist mindset towards survivors. So we want to protect them, so the logic flows from distress that might be linked to participatory activities, and we want to protect them then from choices about their own well-being and safety. So find a legal process where a survivor can discern for themselves their own safety and well-being. I know very few, right? So this thought system is quite pervasive. Last year, I did some work with the Access to Justice Center for Excellence, and we're exploring intimate partner violence and consensual dispute resolution and the appropriateness of it. In a side study, I talked to some intimate partner violence researchers, and a number of these issues came up. But they were re-looking at these fundamental concepts. So vulnerability, rather than seeing as a block categorization, which we know for all of us, we have different modes of vulnerability in our life, it's also true for survivors of violence. The metaphor is a wave, you know, it comes in and out. It's situational rather than categorical, and that coincides with vulnerability research. Rather than re-victimization, right, so distress associated with participation, in over 20 years of intimate partner violence, trauma research, and research on individuals who've been impacted by sexual violence, they're correlating their experience in participatory action, feminist participatory action research with concrete benefits. They're saying things like, this has benefits for me, like growth. I grow related to that experience. I have insights. I can make sense of it and organize it in my life. I don't feel alone because I shared it. There's some emotional relief that comes through the sharing. And I'm highly motivated, these are societal benefits, by helping others in similar circumstances. If I can be a part of something that creates a resource that may be used to prevent further violence, I would like to go through that process, even if it is at times distressful. Distress, even when it does occur in participatory events, is not necessarily negative. This is a shared view among survivors who evaluate their participation and researchers, as it's connected with these benefits. So the studies on regret show that individuals aren't regretting, even if they have experiences of negative emotional experiences in the process. So this coincides with 20 years of research. It's almost consistent across the board. And it calls for a rethinking of some of these fundamental concepts, one of them being re-victimization. So the old view might have been emotional distress that's linked to one's participation, particularly in participatory research, to re-victimization, as Mavis talked about it, which is a reoccurring agency loss that happens through the process of seeking justice. So I think that every crime, so for something like intimate partner violence, there's strong power over dimensions. When those power over dimensions get recreated in the process of seeking justice, that I think is a way to understand what is meant by survivors when they're talking about re-victimization in our legal processes. They use drastic language to describe it, and I think we need to attend to that language. So these are some of the barriers. I wanted to think about the thought systems that might limit our participation. What kind of opportunities, though, that's the other half, might this present? And at the University of Victoria, we're experimenting with building a legal design lab. The vision of the lab is to embed the value of equity into matters of law and justice. And I know a lot of us in the access to justice space, we're continually expressing frustration about, talking a lot but not doing anything. What I really like about design is sort of an immediately practical practice. We don't even always understand the problem entirely. We iterate and prototype along the way, and our understanding of what we need to do in that regard evolves. So a lab, the discipline is so new, is even the idea of what a legal design lab is coming into focus. It draws a lot from the natural sciences. We're going to experiment, we're going to iterate, we're going to prototype on these justice problems. We're going to be committed to a participatory methodology, which means we're going to co-design the design with people itself. We're going to talk about who owns the legal product. We're going to tend to power in the space of design. We're going to view it as a justice activity. We're going to integrate those PAR, participatory action research principles. It's an excellent discipline for understanding and addressing proactively power. We're going to work with trauma-informed principles as well and apply conflict resolution principles to the space. Because we're going to have design involves a lot of different worldviews, legal actors with individuals' lived experience, interdisciplinary participants, nonprofits. Not everyone shares the same perspective all the time. So it's, in a way, we need methods to deliberate when there are different views on the future of law and justice, which is what legal design is invested in. Participation may also include capability building and education. So what that means is that alongside a legal design lab event, we're going to build in opportunities for individuals to learn about design itself and learn about the topic, the legal topic that's at play. We might also have to, and this is a very big challenge, and I'm not sure exactly how we're going to do this, attend to resource differences that impact an ability of an individual to participate that are going on in their life. Some of the infrastructuring considerations, how someone might access the space, what technologies need to be put in place to enable their participation. And the objectives are that this lab is going to serve 3 different purposes. So design, we want to design legal services, resources, institutions, and programs. Institutions is pretty aspirational, but we're a university, we can't, hold back anything. But also education. So students are going to be a part of this lab. It's a way of learning, experiential learning, and building it into design, and it's a place of socio-legal research. So we're going to collect data, as we've been talking about throughout the conference, through legal design activity. One of the projects that has come up so far, and I'm open and interested if you have project ideas as well, is a partnership with the nonprofit organization She Matters. They're creating a evidence self-collection kit, and they've already done some work to engage with survivors of violence. And now they want us to apply a design method to the development of a kit. So we're going to look at human-centered design principles, affordances, signifiers, all those kind of things on the development of the kit itself. We're going to apply a trauma-informed lens to prototype the actual process of using the kit. So you may have to visualize the instructions and make sure they're accessible. We might have to test them with people. And then we're going to design with them an implementation package to ensure that legal professionals are trained in the use of the kit and aware of it. We're going to have mock trials where we stress test it to see if it would hold up for evidence collection in a trial setting. That we're hoping to do in January to April 2027. Just a final note on practical recommendations. So really this is about a conceptual shift, this presentation, to think that we can participate with individuals who've been impacted by violence, and we can do so effectively. I've been critical in some ways about human-centered design. It does not have enough consideration of the impact of bias. How our worldviews, if we're coming from a privileged vantage point, reflexively recenter throughout the design process. Even if I do my best to understand the lived experience of an individual with a justice problem, my own internal world is going to impact how design plays out. So I need to actively engage them in the design of a legal solution. This does something closer to empowerment. This also breaks dependency that comes from an individual in their engagement with legal professionals. So in that regard, then I would say try participatory design with carefully designed methodologies. My practical recommendation is to build capability building that would enhance an individual's ability to participate in the legal design event, both in the design and in the legal topic, and collect feedback on the design process itself. That way you can continue to improve your methodology over time. It continues, the design feedback loop is built right into the process. And that's it for me. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Aaron. Well, we need a lot more time because I don't know how you're all feeling out there, but there's a lot of information here. The 3 people on this panel have done an extensive amount of research, and I want to open it up, but just before that, if you would indulge me for a quick moment, I will just tell you a story. First of all, I told you I'm from Newfoundland and Labrador. I'm a lawyer. I'm still out in the field practicing too, and I'm also doing some other work on the side, but there's a project there which I encourage you to look at called the Journey Project. And it was quite life-changing for me. I do work with intimate partner violence with women, and interestingly enough, some men now. So this is very interesting area to hear the researchers and then to hear where they're going. And I want to talk about Jen as well after about the rurals. So here's the double whammy. So I'm working on a file that I'm thinking to myself, how can I best serve? How can I help? You know, the Journey Project said, we are referring these to lawyers who have trauma-informed training. And we want everybody to do trauma-informed training. And it is life-changing. It is completely different from anything we've learned. And you know, it's a humbling experience for me to say this because, you know, my heart has been stretched like you cannot imagine listening to the stories. And that's what I've learned is hear the participant in the justice process, hear them. What do they want? Mavis made such an incredible point today that I hadn't heard before, it phrased that way. And I'm gonna say it wrong, Mavis, I'm sorry, but you can correct me, but it's something about how they survived the abuse or the intimate partner violence, but they don't think they could survive or haven't survived the family law justice system. So for all you, because I know we are all kindred spirits in this room, because that's what we're here to do. And I really want to make this point, though, to kind of disseminate this out. Take a look at the Journey Project. It's doing some incredible work. You can just look them up, Journey Project. But the reason I mention them is not, yes, I'm making a plug too, but it's really because with this particular woman I had last week interaction with, and then we're still interacting now, and she's still reaching out. She's up far north. So speaking to Jennifer today, the rural issue became massive because she could not get access to a court, and the courts refused to allow any online registering of court pleadings. So what does she do? I can't register them either, by the way. In our province, we can't do online registration. Now she's already beyond traumatized. She's just had been sexually assaulted. She's got a 9-month-old baby. And she's far away from me too, so I can't even sit with her and have a cup of tea with her, if you know what I mean. So what do you do? And so now you've got the rural issue, and you've also got the intimate partner violence issue of her saying to me, it's not worth it, I can't do it, I don't have the strength anyway. And this is the point we have to involve, and that's what my panelists today are saying, and I'm saying but I've gotten to know them so well that I feel like it's my team here. But these guys are really the ones I want to just turn this out to you guys now to say, how do we resolve some of these things? How do we solve them? I mean, I know it's no simple answer, but I encourage you now to kind of make comments, ask questions, and the point is, when I went to the court, by the way, and basically begged, I could not, A, get the documents registered, and B, and that was the rural issue, but B, she has to face the person. She has to go and face them. So when you have to go and face somebody who is you know, destroyed you basically in terms of the damage that's been done violently. It is, you know, and I can't even be there to put my arm around her, you know what I mean? Because I don't know who's a lawyer in the room, but, you know, sometimes it's the story that Mavis was talking about, it's the participation that Aaron and Jen, it's all of that is what would really form a justice system that would work. So I'm just throwing that out to you because I'm still trying to figure out how can I help this woman, because I'm not just gonna give up and go away. But that said, again, she can't afford to pay anybody either, because it's also an economic coercive control, which we just saw the new tort that's come out from the Supreme Court of Canada. I see people nodding. This is great, because I'm a little bit nervous sharing all this, but I'm like lying in bed thinking about everything and how this is all gonna come together. So I encourage you now, and thank you for letting me have a moment, because what all my panelists have said here is absolutely critical. The research is critical, but like Mavis said, how do we mobilize the knowledge and change? Thank you so much, and I see somebody there already. Thank you so much. Go ahead.
Hi, thanks for all your presentations. This is really interesting. I have a question for Mavis about kind of her data set. So just first question, what was the kind of geographic scope of who you collected from? And then the main question, did you have examples in your data set of participants who felt that their legal assistance was like effective and responsive? And if so, how did that kind of link with their experiences and outcomes?
So, yeah, despite considerable effort to get, you know, a diverse population, we did hear, I think about 50% were urban. So we did hear across, it was across the province of Ontario. So we did hear from some women in the north, and we did hear in terms of sort of rural urban, but about 50% were urban. And then also in terms of sort of race and age and class, there was some diversity. We were able to hear from populations that were, like we heard from more diverse populations than are represented in Ontario census, for instance. So, you know, that's sort of what I'll say now. I do have lots more information. Actually, Luke's Place has a summary, but I also have tons more information, which I'm happy to share. And then the other, oh yes, so yes, we did hear about some folks who were satisfied with their experiences, and when they were satisfied, it was because they felt heard. They, you know, despite having, even the ones that were satisfied generally had trouble finding legal representation, but some did find legal representation that they were very happy with. And you know, many of them that were happy talked about things like the, you know, lawyers being willing to work with them on the financial side of things. Lots of women talked about the amount of legwork that they did to help, and so lawyers worked with them to sort of like they would go away and get as much information as they could that then would sort of cut down on the cost. So sort of the relationships and the partnering that seemed to be a really positive thing. And then some of those sort of very simple but really important, they felt, when it was positive, they felt believed. They felt that they still might have been encouraged not to bring up the issue of violence. So that seemed to be a pretty consistent theme. But yes, there certainly were positive experiences. There were also positive experiences of judges and positive experiences of, you know, court staff and positive. So yes, there were positive experiences along the way. That was not overwhelmingly what we heard. Thanks.
And we would kind of mention here now, oh, that's great, okay.
Sorry.
No, go ahead, please.
I'm going to be a bit critical, so
good.
please bear with me. I come from a health research background, and I'm seeing it here too for the first time, is the inequities in knowledge building between jurisdictions. Okay, and that's the huge gap that's going to railroad us off track. Because each of you are doing something specific in your regions that could be beneficial for everybody. We also don't listen to the voice from Quebec enough, because there's some really cutting edge justice things being done in Quebec from the Justice Lab at the University of Montreal. I don't know if there's anybody from there here, but we need to hear the voices, and there has to be a database or something that we can bring the information together to know what we're dealing with. Because reinventing the justice system, if we don't know what we're dealing with and the gaps that exist already, and then you implement something, everything's going to go sideways. So that's what happened in health in Canada, even happening today. So I'd really just give you a warning that it's really fine and dandy, all these individual things that are being done, but if they're not co-shared and shared across the jurisdictions, that's our barrier to equal justice. We won't be able to get there. Just sorry to be negative a bit.
No, it's not. No, merci beaucoup. On apprécie ça beaucoup. Parce que ça, c'est vraiment, vraiment important. This is the problem. The country is massive geographically. So we're dealing with this issue of this fantastic work being done that I heard in Winnipeg and something being done. We do need that. No, that was a fabulous comment, because this is what I'm sitting up here thinking, how do we bring this together? And, all the panelists were talking about how do we mobilize. So, I mean, this kind of, this is the kind of commentary we need, because this is what's really happening. It's not just about creating a portal. It's about the sharing. And we talked about somebody in another panel, I don't know if any of you were attending, shared a kit. And it's a kit on intimate partner violence, and it was fabulous. And I've kept it, I'm bringing it back. So yeah, that'll go back to St. John's, Newfoundland, but, or I might go to my colleague in Ottawa. But how do we share all this? And I just asked the room that question, because, and thank you for that comment, because each person's doing such valuable work, yes, how do we share it? And then how do we further mobilize it? Because, these conferences are so wonderful, as everybody says, to share and inspire each other. And we might leave feeling a little more invigorated or a little more refreshed, but that doesn't change the system. So I put that out to challenge you. Any suggestions, any comments, any ideas on how we can share all this, because there are valuable resources there. And I really thank you for that, because I think that we see that in health as well, but health has been coming together more, but there's still, well, yeah, see, okay. Well, but there's still those divisions. Provincially, it is so different across this country, provincially. So I'll just, yes, oh, great. Oh, thanks, David. Go ahead. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody. Great presentations. I'll just throw out 3 quick questions, but take them or leave them. Jennifer, I'm curious about whether the infrastructure lens meets up with the participatory design sort of question. So, I would think that, does that literature sort of say, well, when we're doing infrastructure, it should be participatory, so can it reinforce in that way? By the way, point to you on the battle about whether infrastructure or ecosystem is the right metaphor, because Justice Karakatsanis used infrastructure, so you win on that one. For Aaron, it's really promising, the design lab approach. I'm thinking about the role of students in thinking about sort of power and whether, as a law professor, getting students involved in that sort of experiential thing, I guess we're always conscious of sort of that being extractive in some way, that like we're using, this sort of participatory help, but for our own educational purposes. So I just wanted to float that as something that, if you've thought about that. Mavis, I'd be interested to hear a little bit more about the knowledge to action gap that you mentioned, but I don't want to, it doesn't have to take up all the time if there's other questions.
Those are great. Does any panelists want to respond to what David just said?
Look, you go ahead. You go, first question first.
That's true. Thank you, David, for those questions. So yeah, I think it does meet up with participatory design. The infrastructure lens and infrastructural methodologies, there's a vast literature on that as well from different disciplines. It lines up really nicely in the way that I've approached it as sort of an institutional ethnography approach, where we're looking at the work that people are doing in their daily lives. And so it may not be participatory in the sense of my particular work has not been participatory in the sense of participants co-designing along with me, but there's no reason it couldn't be. I think the idea of this infrastructural lens is to look at what people are actually doing. How are they using their tools? How are they working with institutions? What are they bumping up against? And that is very granular. And so the most interesting work on infrastructures has been very ethnographic. There are other methods like walking through infrastructures with people. So walking through like interfaces that they need to use. Filing at I'm looking at my federal court clerk. Filing at the federal court. What is that experience like for people? How do they do it? What kind of help do they want to see? What kind of problems do they run up against? And then what do they create from it? I think it's, we look so much at barriers and gaps, but especially in the rural world, the solution is often, well, so many gaps, so few people, hard to access resources, hard to access broadband, that sort of thing. The ways that people are overcoming it, I think, is a much more interesting way to look at things, and that does require people's participation, the people who are doing the work.
Well, I want to say, it's David, I really appreciate the question. I'm thinking critical approaches to participatory legal design methodology means we need to have these kind of conversations that help me to reflect on my own methodology as well. And so is student participation somewhat extractivist? Is that yes, possibly. So it actually gives me something to think about and consider. As I understand the structuring of legal design labs regarding education, student involvement is incredibly valuable and on some level necessary. So oftentimes they're publishing student works and efforts to visualize law is one way that they do it. And all sorts of really profound creative initiatives come out of it. There's also just the practical reality that many legal design projects are under-resourced. So we involve it in a classroom setting, then kind of has student participation that might have other skills, and it's a way to work with some of the resource constraints. But it's also very important to consider what you raised around, is this for our benefit, and do we need to consider the power and the framework that we're applying to it? So I want to thank you for the question. It gives me something to reflect on.
Thank you very much. I love all those questions, and I'm going to start by answering that question, which is I totally disagree that it's extractive, and I think you design it so it is not. I've done community engaged teaching and learning for 30 years when there wasn't that language. I think it has huge potential mutual benefits. Just about every course I teach, whether it's first year, fourth year, grad course. I'm teaching a grad course right now that I designed called Criminal Justice Policy in Practice, the Knowledge to Action Gap. So I think it's really important. I think we all gain. I think we need to be doing it more. So I'd love to talk about that. And then in terms of knowledge mobilization, yes. So I honestly think that this is, so I've really started to try to learn more about, as you probably know, it's a huge area, body of literature. It's overwhelming. I'm in the process of taking a knowledge mobilization certificate. But yes, I think this is really, I think we need to do a lot more about understanding what audiences we're trying to share information with, and I think it really, really matters, and we know that people need to hear information more than once in multiple ways. It has to be co-designed. So for example, in terms of training and education, legal professionals also have to be part of that. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense, right? So Luke's Place, for instance, they do a lot of education and training for legal professionals, but they don't involve the legal professionals enough in the development of their tools and resources. So I just think that this is really, and I feel like everything I've heard for the last couple of days, I mean, think we really need to get to the knowledge to action gap. Thank you.
And
It's
Judge,
like you were a plant.
yeah, yeah. Did we plant you? We didn't, I swear. But judges need that training too. Judges need that trauma-informed training. And this knowledge into action. Mavis's work, if you could look at it, and I'm going to go back to that gentleman. Thank you for that comment so much, because you're just making me think, I'm going to throw it out. What have I got to lose? You know, and I'm getting old, frankly, so here we go. I mean, I think we need to develop something that's a national sharing, right? Yep, and where we all sharing these resources and this incredible work. And let's hear about how this design lab goes. Let's hear about Jen's, what she's doing with infrastructure and patchworking. Let's get Mavis's research out there and share it. The problem is we don't have that sharing. I mean, I felt like someone gave me a Bible when they gave me this book with these laminated sheets, and I don't know what the name of it was again, but it was about screening and then what you could do to mediate instead of having to go to court, where my clients get so intimidated and scared in the court that they can't even function. So we've got two people here, and we'll start with you. Thank you so much.
I'm here today as part of the Canadian Bar Association Access to Justice Committee, but I'm a family law lawyer from the Halton region in Ontario.
Thank you.
And I've heard somebody indicate that that some of the people they interviewed had trouble finding a lawyer that was knowledgeable on the issue of intimate partner violence. And I can tell you that once the Divorce Act was first amended in 2019-2020, the Canadian Bar Association Family Law Section lobbied the Federation of Law Societies to ensure that there was a new rule of professional conduct that required lawyers to learn about intimate partner violence, particularly with the obligations under the new Divorce Act amendments, with having to consider alternative dispute resolution and giving advice to the clients about that. The Federation of Law Societies have not picked up on that yet. But if you truly want to make sure that all lawyers know about intimate partner violence, and the opposite, which is the effect of what you do as a representative of the perpetrator and how you perpetrate that intimate partner violence, you need to try to find a common ground where they have to learn it, and that would be the Law Society's Rules of Professional Conduct. So you might want to consider looking into that as well, to help lobby to the Federation of Law Societies that there needs to be something in our Rules of Professional Conduct that force us to have to learn this stuff.
Hear, hear.
Fabulous. And one more. We've gone over time, guys, but thank you for staying. I can see everyone's interested. I hope nobody's going to be mad at me for this. Please, this is fascinating, and I hope that we're writing these down. Are we writing them down? Because I want to actually get some action from it. Thank you. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah,
Thanks.
very, very quick. Coming from a more kind of community justice kind of approach, a tool that I'm not sure if everybody's super familiar with, but talking about, filling in potholes and things like that at a much more kind of community level. 211 Canada, it's just a phone number the same as 311. I don't know how much folks are familiar with that, but that's just a service that you can call into and will work in a very similar way that, will connect you to the services that you need at, again, a very community-based level, very easy to access, needs more knowledge around it. It's not quite at the law level, but for folks that really need that kind of a thing, and connecting to justice at a very community level. Just wanted to throw that out there. Thanks. Yeah.
Thank you. Did everybody hear that? 211 Canada. Thank you. That's very multiple languages. And Indigenous, because I have Indigenous clients. Okay, this is fabulous. Everybody's hearing this. Doug, you're down there. You're thinking about that national sort of sharing that we could do with the resources. Okay, and back to you.
Yeah, I'm not affiliated with them, but 24 hours, 150 languages. Yeah.
Fabulous. 150 languages, everybody. Please disseminate that out wherever you're coming from. I have to tell you, this has been a very amazing experience. I just want to thank these panelists that are and their incredible work. And I thank you all for your attention today. And please bring this forward, bring this out, disseminate, and let's make some change. Thank you. Et merci beaucoup. J'apprécie la conférence. That was a good one.